Bienvenidos de regreso a la continuación de esta jornada. Welcome back. ¿Me pueden dar más volumen, por favor, para que se escuche bien? ¿Se escucha? Sí, ahora sí, los que estaban por aquí que tenían problemas de escuchar, ¿ya escuchan bien? Gracias. Vamos a continuar y es para mí un gran honor presentar a David Almond. David Almond nació en Newcastle, Inglaterra. Es uno de los narradores de libros para niños y jóvenes más importantes de la actualidad y es ganador del premio Hans Christian Andersen en 2010. El mismo año fue finalista en el premio Astrid Lindgren. Además, ha sido galardonado con la medalla Carnegie, la medalla de plata del Premio Inteligente y doblemente premiado con el Whitbread. Entre sus libros más destacados se encuentran Skelling, The Boy Who Swam with Piranhas, El niño que nadó con pirañas, My Dad's a Birdman, Mi papá es un hombre pájaro. La literatura de David Almond apela a la inteligencia de los lectores con técnicas literarias complejas como relaciones intertextuales e historias enmarcadas. Almond cree en sus lectores y tiene la certeza de que a los jóvenes les gusta leer. Dice David, escuchamos con frecuencia, los niños ya no leen. Son una generación enchufada, sus cerebros atontados por el iPod y la pantalla de la computadora. ¿Es eso verdad? No. Quiero invitar a los profetas de la decadencia a que conozcan a los lectores jóvenes que he tratado en todo el mundo. Niños que aman los libros, las narraciones, los poemas, las obras de teatro. Niños que hacen las preguntas más incisivas sobre los personajes y la narrativa, sobre la forma en que las palabras funcionan, sobre el proceso creativo. Niños con mentes exploradoras e imaginación flexible. Y es cierto, niños, jóvenes y adultos disfrutan enormemente la obra de David Almond. David, please.
Thank you very much. Good morning. It's fantastic to be here. It's the first time I've been to Mexico City. And it's wonderful to come to an IBI Congress. IBI, of course, does such fantastic work all around the world. And it's great to meet so many friends that I've met at different congresses and different functions all across the world. It really is a remarkable organisation. So thank you for everything that you do. I think the thing I love about IBI and about a congress like this and a gathering of people like this is it is based on optimism. It's based on the belief that books, reading, writing, art, creative activity can actually help to change the world, to make people better and to make the world a better place. And sometimes when we say those kind of things, some people just sneer and say, they're romantic. They're romantic, they have a fanciful notion of what they're doing, or they're kind of living in some kind of fairyland. But actually, I think they are the people who are wrong, and I think we are the people who are right. They are dull, and we are interesting. And I think we see it particularly in its interest, as this has been mentioned several times in conversations I've had this week, we see it in people who gain power, people who become politicians. They become ever more dull, and they tell ever more dull lies about the world and about the children who can change the world. But we, I think, are committed to something totally different. We are committed to creating a better world than the world that the kind of besooted, boring politicians can ever really imagine, because what they do lack is imagination. I was going to prepare a speech before I came, and I tried to, and I thought, well, I couldn't really do it, because I knew whatever I would say would be influenced by what happened when I came this week. And that's certainly what has happened, because every time I travel, every time I see people all across the world, I learn new things. So what does it mean to be inclusive? You know, I think inclusivity is at the heart of all art and of all storytelling. I think what we do goes to the fundamentals of human experience, and especially when we're working with children, when we write stories for children or do illustrations for children, or work creatively with children, or stimulate children in all different kinds of ways to use their minds, to use their imaginations. So I came to Mexico this week from a tiny corner, the northeast of England. It's a very apparently insignificant place, but all places are significant. All places are the middle of the world. And I think in all storytelling there's a heart which resonates in all true storytelling. Whenever I travel, I remember traveling to the United States when I'd written a book called Kit's Wilderness, which is about coal mining and pit villages and the history of coal mining. And it's set in a specific part of the United Kingdom. And I was in West Virginia, and after I'd been talking, a man came to me and said, "David, how did you know to write about my village?" I was in Japan 2 years ago, in northern Japan, which had been devastated by earthquake, tsunami. And I was up in an area where the great Japanese poet and children's author Kenji Miyazawa had lived and worked. And I walked on the banks of the river where Kenji had walked. And I recalled that actually I felt that he and I and all writers were actually writing about the same place. When I was in northern Japan, I felt as if I was in northern England. And it's interesting that Kenji Miyazawa's works are published in England, in Northumberland, in the north of England. So there's a resonance between places which seem so different, and they're brought together by the imagination and by the spirit of poetry and storytelling. A couple of years ago, I was in Morocco. I really love Morocco, and one of the things I love about Morocco is the marketplaces. And I was in the marketplace in Morocco as the sun was going down, dusk was coming on. There was lots of music, there was lots of selling and buying. And in the center of the marketplace, there was a storyteller. And he was sitting on a stool, and people were surrounding him, listening to him. And I didn't have a clue what he was talking about. I couldn't understand his words. But what I did understand was the movement of his body, the movement of his hands, the groans that he made, the responses of the audience. And I saw that there was something very fundamental about stories, which isn't just to do with language. It's to do with the body. And it was to do with the memory. And it's to do with dreams. And however anybody tells a story, that's what they're drawing on. We see stories as things in books, things fixed in books. But deep below the things fixed in books are the things that hold us together. The spirit of storytelling, the soul of storytelling, which is to do with the body and with memory. And our stories that we tell each other, the illustrations that we make, go right back to the beginning of human time. We got together in the first place because we could protect each other, but also because somebody like the storyteller in the marketplace in Morocco would tell us a story. And every time we write, every time we draw on those ancient forces. And children know this. That's why it is such an excitement to write for young people, because children are close to the beating heart of what it is to tell stories, to make marks on pages. When you write for children, you realize that you're as close to an adult telling a story at dusk as you are to books on pages. You're as close to the human voice and body as you are to literature. And it's that core of kind of common meaning, common purpose, which holds everything together. Beneath language, beneath frontiers, beneath walls, there's something that unites us all, which is to do with us, the human, artistic, creative being. I've been in 3 schools this week in Mexico City. Remarkable schools, 3 very different schools. And children are always the ones who ask the best questions. I was in a school called Jose Arturo Pichado on 2 days ago. And this was a school with all kinds of children in it. And I went into this school, and I was welcomed into the school. And as I went in, they had decorated the whole school around one of my books, a book called The Boy Who Swam the Piranhas. And I saw models of my characters. I saw artwork about my characters. I saw poetry that the children had written about my characters. I saw stories that the children had written about my characters. And my character is a kind of northeastern lad. And he spoke to these children in Mexico City. And this boy is quite a troubled boy. He goes through the drama of growing up. He goes from being a troubled lad to being a more confident lad. And it was interesting, when I went into the school, one of the staff came and said, there are quite a few Stanley Potts in this school. And I thought, isn't that remarkable? A fictional character can speak to children and to teachers on the other side of the world. And children know, we talk all the time about what messages we should give to children. And you can give messages, you can tell children what you're intending to mean. You can say, I'm trying to be inclusive of everybody. But if you tell a story well, the child will get the meaning about all of the things, the abstractions like inclusivity. I was in that school and they were asking me lots of questions. And a boy put his hand up, he said, David, he said, why does Stan look after the littlest, weakest fish? Why does he love them more than any others? And when he spoke, I could see in his eyes, he was saying that actually he felt a connection between Stanley Potts' fish and the people who are the weakest members of society. And I said to him, why do you think? Isn't it because if we don't love each other properly, even the weakest of us, the whole society becomes less strong? And he said, yes, that's right. He understood. I was in another school, a very different school. This was a private school, lots of the children from a Jewish heritage. They spoke English very well. They were obviously quite rich and sophisticated children. But I saw another way that stories reach across all kinds of boundaries. And we were talking about one of my books called Clay. And the boy at the edge of the room put his hand up and said, David, he said, your book is actually about the golem from Jewish legend, isn't it? I said, yes, it is. And this is a book set in Felling-on-Tyne, the town that I grew up in the northeast of England. But this boy in Mexico City had recognized a story from Prague in Central Europe. And he drew all of those things together with one question. He understood. He got it. I was in another school, in Escuela Unidas Continental. Sorry about my pronunciation. And these children, again, were quite sophisticated children. They obviously had lots of advantages. And one child put his hand, this boy said, why does Bobby have a friend like Joseph? And Bobby is a nice lad, who kind of yearns for a good life. Joseph is a bit of a ragamuffin, grows a bit of a bad lad, a bad boy. And when he asked the question, he knew what I was going to say. And I said, well, unless we have friends from all different kinds of backgrounds, how can we be proper people ourselves? We have to include everybody. And this boy said, yes, that's right, isn't it? He understood. They also asked really interesting questions, said, why do you write about tiny things when you also write about things like darkness and light and life and death? And I said, well, that's how stories work, isn't it? He said, yeah, that's how stories work. Because unless the tiny things like tiny fish and people wearing the right kinds of shoes are in place, the big universal themes like inclusivity can't have any meaning at all. Meaning comes down to the incidental details of ordinary people's lives. People often ask me, why do you write for young people? And I think the answer is in those answers and questions that the children gave me this week. The excitement of writing for the young is that we live in a very ancient world. We live in a universe that's 13.7 billion years old. It's so immense you can't even conceive of it. It's so huge. But every time a child is born, that universe is recreated. And there's a real excitement in writing and illustrating for children who are seeing things for the very first time. So the pessimists, the dullards, the boring destroyers, again, don't understand that. But children get it. Children recreate the world each time they grow up. The dramas that we write about, the dramas of being born, growing up, falling in love, falling out of love, living, dying, they're all ancient, ancient stories. But they're told afresh every time a new child steps into the world. And every child is a new opportunity, just as every new world is every new story is a new opportunity. Children are natural artists. And that's the kind of statement that again gets the boring dullards going, oh, children are natural artists. Children are natural artists. Another question I asked in the school the other day, they asked me to ask them some questions. So I said, okay, I'll ask you some questions. Who likes to write? Oh, I like to write. Who likes to read? I like to read. Who dances? I dance. Who sings? I sing. Who likes doing drama? I like doing drama. Who likes playing sport? Oh, I like playing sport. This is the world of children. Children really are natural artists. Picasso said it can take a lifetime. He said it can take years to learn to paint like a master, but it takes a lifetime to learn to paint like a child. And I think unless we are willing to be children ourselves, we can't be inclusive. We can't be proper grown-up adults. We can't have a proper grown-up world. The act of creation itself is childlike. Another question that a child asked me the other day, and I can say she was sitting kind of over there, a girl asked me a question. She said, David, is it possible to be kind of childish and grown up? And I said, yes, and that's the kind of purpose that we should all have. And I showed them my notebooks, and I said, look, when I'm writing, I'm like a baby again. I'm like a child again. I used to imagine that when people grew up and they became, prize-winning illustrators and writers, that they all felt very, yeah, I'm really grown up, Roger. Yeah. I'm really intelligent. I'm really sophisticated. Yeah. But it's not true, is it? It's not true. I do a lot of the children are always interested in where you work. And I work in a shed a lot of the time. When I'm in my shed, I'm like a little boy. And I go into my shed and I mess about. And if a school inspector looked into my shed, he'd say, that man is not doing anything worthwhile. What can be the possible positive outcome of that kind of activity? How disgraceful. I always show children my notebooks. Because the thing about a book is, it looks dead grown up, doesn't it? It looks so grown up. It looks so, wow, it looks so perfect. But we aren't perfect. The illusion of perfection is an illusion. It's a trick. Publishers play this trick of making it look as if we're all perfect. And people take this off the shelf and they say, look at that David Ormond. Look how tidy he is. How neat he is. Oh, he's perfect, isn't he? But kids don't. I always ask the question when I go into the school. I say, is anybody perfect in here? And of course, they have a joke because there's always somebody say, yeah, I'm perfect. But of course, they know that they're not. They know that they're not. So they love the sense that when you make something which does things like win prizes, it's actually also something that they can do. And I also always show them pages from a notebook. This is a blow-up of one of the pages from my notebook. And that's kind of like the inside of my head, and it's like the inside of my shed. And again, like me listening to the storyteller in Morocco, you don't need to be able to read it. You don't need to kind of understand it, to understand, oh yeah, I can do that. That's what my mind is like. So it makes the whole purpose, the act of writing, the act of talking about writing, in itself to be inclusive. So all children, when they see that, they go, oh, and then they look at the teacher and say, ooh. But of course, the teachers love it too, because they want to be set free. They want to be set free to be childlike themselves. One of the reasons, I know there are teachers in the audience tonight, one of the reasons that teachers become teachers is that they love the child within themselves. I don't know how much time I've got. Sorry. That timer's not working. Sorry? It's stopped. I suppose what I'm saying is that we grow up. We appear to make a world which is grown up. The world is populated by people who feel as if they're very grown up. The most dangerous people are the ones who think they are more grown up than anybody else. The most dangerous people in the world are the ones who want to tell people how to behave. The most dangerous people in the world are the ones who try to deny the innate creativity and artisticness of children. They are the ones who are the dull destroyers. Destruction comes in many forms. Again, when I was in Japan, I was in northern Japan, which had been devastated, and libraries had been washed away, libraries had been destroyed by a natural act of destruction. The earth itself had destroyed these libraries. And of course, the people in northern Japan were struggling and fighting to recreate the libraries. And I met lots of teachers and children whose purpose now was to rebuild those libraries. I was talking to my friend last night from Gaza, and she was talking about the political destruction of libraries by bombs. Bombs had destroyed the libraries in Gaza. Their purpose now was to rebuild those libraries. These are major acts of destruction that people fight back against. One of the things that happens in the more, kind of orderly world is that destruction comes in a more kind of offhand form. In Newcastle, the city beside where I live, a lot of libraries were closed down recently, and they were closed down on the basis of several kind of mistruths. And one of the mistruths was, kids don't read anymore, so we don't need libraries. Another mistruth was, we can't really afford these things when we're paying zillions of pounds to bankers, and when we're paying zillions of pounds to build bombs, and we're paying zillions of pounds in England to build nuclear weapons. It's those kind of lies that led to the invasion of Iraq a few years ago. The lies told by politicians about Iraq led to the destruction of Iraq. Another question that was asked to me the other day was a boy who was talking about The Fire Eaters, a book that I wrote about the Cuban Missile Crisis. And this boy came to me and he said, David, do you think this will ever happen again? Do you think there will be a thing like the Cuban Missile Crisis again? Do you think there will be a nuclear threat again? And he had absolutely learned to ask that question by reading this book about the Cuban Missile Crisis. So he automatically thought how it might apply to his own life. And I said, well, yes, it might do. But what had happened was that a book, a story, had helped to make him think about the world, to make him think about his own life. The other kinds of lies that are told are about, it's like the scrawny fish in Stanley Potts' tale, like this boy who asked, why do you look after the scrawny fish? In England, we've had the kind of lies where we had a big, the boring, financial crisis. And the people who were blamed for the financial crisis were the poorest citizens in our society. The bankers weren't blamed. Well, they were blamed for the crisis, but in order to satisfy them, we gave them £1 billion more. The children and parents who hadn't caused anything at all, they were the one who had cuts inflicted on them. It was based on lies. The things that we do are benign. Benign is a soft word. The things that we do are creative and optimistic. It's not about individual writers and illustrators and prize winners, but it's about all of us working together and playing and creating at the heart of the world, beyond the walls that we build between each other, between the languages that seem to separate us, beyond the lies that people tell about us, beyond the things that try to stop us becoming full, functioning human beings, and beyond the things that try to stop our society from being fully creative. At the end of this session in one of the schools yesterday, the teacher said, have you got any questions that you'd like to ask the children? And I said to them, I asked them the questions about who dances, who sings, and they all said yes, yes, yes. And I asked them what they wanted to do with their lives. And they said, all kinds of different things that they wanted to do with their lives. And then I said, do you think you're going to be able to create a better world? And they thought about it, and they said, yes, I think we can. And I think that, in the end, is our purpose. It is to inspire children and young people through their creative activities, through their reading, through their writing, through the books that we make for them, through the books that we create with them, is in the end that this world will transcend the boring powers of destruction and that we'll create something that will be much nicer. And if we don't, then there'll be more children coming along. The world will constantly be recreated and recreated and recreated because it comes from young people and their activities. So they will create a better world, better than our world. Okay, thank you.
Muchas gracias a David Almond. Invitamos a pasar a la mesa de diálogo a Evelyn, Akos, Roger, Pete y Fanuel. Mientras ellos se acomodan, voy a hablarles un poco de nuestro moderador, Fanuel Hanan, que es licenciado en Letras de la Universidad Católica Andrés Bello y Magister Scientiarum en Ciencias y Artes Aplicadas de la Universidad José María Vargas. Coordinó el Departamento de Selección de Libros para Niños y Jóvenes del Banco del Libro y dirigió la revista Para. Ha ganado el Premio Nacional de Literatura Infantil en Venezuela con La basura, problema de todos y Pipo Kilómetro, y ha sido incluido en la lista de honor IBI con Cartas a Leandro. Es autor del ensayo Leer y mirar el libro álbum, un género en construcción, y de libros de información para niños, entre el que destaca Semillas, incluido en el programa CEP en México. Es teórico e investigador en literatura infantil, profesor invitado en el Máster Gretel de Literatura Infantil y autor y profesor del curso virtual de escritura creativa de CERLALC. Recibió la beca de la International Jugendbibliothek en Múnich para desarrollar investigaciones sobre procesos de impresión en libros antiguos para niños. Con el apoyo de la Embajada de Francia, realizó una investigación sobre la obra de Julio Verne en Amiens y en Nantes. Ha sido invitado como jurado de la Bienal de Ilustración de Bratislava. Es editor de la revista barataria de literatura infantil latinoamericana y ha sido seleccionado como miembro del jurado del Premio Hans Christian Andersen. Actualmente es director de producción en Editorial Larenz y desarrolla propuestas de investigación como Independent Scholar. Se ha especializado en el campo de Visual Literacy e ilustración de libros para niños. Le damos la bienvenida a Fanuel Hanan.
Hello. Hi, everyone. I hope you'll be enjoying this wonderful Congress, this wonderful city, and now this outstanding and wonderful round table. As you have simultaneous translation, I'd rather speak in Spanish. Could you please turn on the presentation? Well, this is the second round table. El tema es inclusión en los libros para niños y en la literatura juvenil. Tenemos 4 figuras principales para este panel. Pierre Gobler, voy a hablar un poquito de él. Nació en Sudáfrica, donde estuvo viviendo hasta 2009. Ha enseñado ilustración en Sudáfrica y el Reino Unido. Ha ilustrado alrededor de 78 libros, la mayoría de los cuales son libros álbum. Como ilustrador, ha ganado premios internacionales. La Manzana Dorada de Bratislava, 2 medallas de plata en el NOMA, Japón, medalla de bronce en la Bienal Internacional del Libro de Teherán y el premio Octogón en Francia. Entre sus más recientes proyectos, desarrolla con otros colegas el Centro Internacional para el Libro Álbum, en sociedad con la Universidad de Worcester. Como segunda speaker tenemos a Akos Ofori Mensah. Ella es editora en Ghana, ha sido presidenta de la Asociación de Editores de Ghana y miembro de la Red de Editores de África. Technicals. Es editora en Ghana, ha sido presidenta de la Asociación de Editoras de Ghana y miembro de la Red de Editores de África. Actualmente es miembro del Consejo del Colectivo Africano del Libro, con base en Oxford y representante regional de IBI para África. La tercera speaker es Evelyn Arispe. Evelyn Arispe es doctora por la Universidad de Cambridge, especializada en literatura infantil y juvenil. Desde 1990 reside en Gran Bretaña, donde ha trabajado como investigadora en varios proyectos sobre literatura infantil, desarrollo lector, género, cultura e identidad. Es docente e investigadora en la Facultad de Educación de la Universidad de Glasgow, donde coordina el Máster Children's Literature and Literacies. Ha impartido cursos y ponencias tanto en varios países de Europa como en México y Estados Unidos. En 2003 publicó junto con Morak Stiles Children Reading Pictures, Interpreting Visual Text, basado en un proyecto sobre la lectura del libro álbum. En español está en el Fondo de Cultura Económica y se llama Lecturas de Imágenes. Ahora prepara con Morak Stiles la segunda edición de este libro. Y por último, tenemos a Roger Melo. Roger Melo nació en 1968 en Brasilia, en tiempos de la dictadura militar. Estudió diseño gráfico en Río de Janeiro. Tiene como mentor a Ciraldo, uno de los más prestigiosos ilustradores de Brasil, con más de 100 libros publicados y en 20 de ellos también como autor. El trabajo de Roger Melo es muy diverso en técnicas y estilos. Sus historias buscan estimular en los lectores una visión crítica del mundo, invitándolos a participar activamente de la lectura, tanto como de la experiencia verbal y la visual. Muchos de sus libros tienen fuerte influencia del folclore y de la cultura popular brasileira, con sus colores y texturas múltiples. Este año, como saben, recibió el premio Hans Christian Andersen. La dinámica de esta round table es atípica. Estas fueron las preguntas que yo planteé a cada uno de los speakers y vamos a tener 12 minutos para que cada uno de ellos exprese de forma mucho más dinámica y fluida con respecto a estas preguntas su opinión. ¿Cuáles son los puntos de conexión entre la literatura infantil y la inclusión? Recuerde que el tema de la mesa es literatura infantil e inclusión. ¿Cuáles ideas ustedes creen que pueden hacer avanzar el debate acerca de la literatura infantil y la inclusión? ¿Cómo podría ir este tema más allá de lo políticamente correcto? ¿Podría usted compartir con nosotros un ejemplo de cómo los libros para niños pueden hacer a los lectores más precavidos, más estimulados por estos temas relacionados con la inclusión social y con la exclusión? ¿Y cómo pueden específicamente ayudarlos a articular un proyecto social? Y además de generar placer y considerar el gran potencial de la literatura que tiene para atrapar lectores en mundos de ficción, ¿puede también la literatura infantil ofrecer herramientas para construir un mundo mejor? Entonces, los dejo con Piet Gobler, que va a comenzar esta intervención.
Thank you. I'll be speaking from the perspective of an illustrator, but also a lecturer in illustration, as you mentioned, at the University of Worcester in England. I'm a South African and lived there for the largest part of my life, and as you might know, we had certain problems regarding inclusiveness for many years there. In England, another set of issues regarding inclusiveness phase one, and one has to address that as a lecturer in illustration, because I believe my task is to prepare students who are illustrating illustration, who will be the illustrators of the books of tomorrow, to be aware of this thing, inclusiveness. What I normally tell them are a couple of things. One is, in the first instance, that became the mantra of our illustration course there, is that everything has potential meaning. Every single color you choose, every expression you choose to illustrate has potential meaning. And I could add to that, has potential political meaning, political in the broadest sense of the word. Another very important thing for an illustration student to know and to remember is that we are reliant upon so many other disciplines to interact with. Literature, art, education, psychology, information science, and all of these have representatives here at this Congress, and all of these disciplines have different interests and takes on inclusiveness, and we work with them. In the third place, as picture book illustrators, we would like to know that we abide to a code of conduct, ethical behavior, and social responsibility. The subject matter we choose to work with, how we portray people and situations does matter. Oops. Everybody cannot do everything to address the matter of inclusivity. So I do the best I can, given the circumstances that I'm in. One of the advantages of my work is the University of Worcester. Is this working? University is a small yet friendly university on a very green campus. It's a non-threatening environment, and it's quite well known for its extensive learning support to people with disabilities. And I could mention that between 20 to 25% of my illustration students have to live with disability of some sort or an impairment. Many of them dyslexia, but also on the spectrum of autism or Asperger's, sorry, not autism, amongst other things. And that is a good indication of how we are inclusive in terms of our students that we have, and also the number of illustrators that we're preparing for the future. What you see there is the new library that the university created in collaboration with the city of Worcester. And I believe this is the largest or the first in Europe where a city and a university collaborated to create a city and university library, which is a very direct step towards inclusivity and into working with the society. There's an example of the children's book section of the library. I think I skipped one now. Yeah, the previous one I wanted to show you because that shows a bridge that's bridging the library. Not working. The library with a shopping center. Bridging the library with a shopping center. And it's not a particularly grand part of the city, even. Another thing that I can do, that I have to my disposal, is I can write the curriculum of this course. We include society projects for the students. All our students have to take part in a storytelling festival organized at the University of Worcester by the English department. The students have to work with artists to present workshops to school children. That gives them a direct access to their audience and to the society. And then I make it my business to introduce my students to my large collection of international picture books that I've been collecting all my life. And I yet have to speak to a person from England and America who does not agree with me and with many others. For example, Quentin Blake and Professor Martin Salisbury from Anglia-Ruskin University, that very often the English-speaking environment tends to be a bit insular, inward-looking, is quite content with its own environment and its own books. I have every intention to work on that and to expose my students to a big and wonderful world out there. I show and tell them the wonderful works, for example, an illustrator like Sean Tan, with The Arrival, The Lost Thing, The Rabbits, wonderful works that are very strong and powerful and deal with inclusivity, the other people, indigenous people disenfranchised within their own country. And then there are also more direct and realistic examples of picture books that do not work with metaphors. And I'm thinking here of South Africa's Nikki Daly, with his iconic book, Not So Fast, Songololo, the story about a little boy who went to town with his granny, and he just wanted one thing, and they were new sneakers. A really extremely moving book, and it happened to be the first South African picture book that... Shall I try? It was the first South African picture book aimed at a mainly white audience that had only black protagonists or main characters in it. It became quite an iconic book. I also tell my students that one always have to take care as a picture book illustrator that the message in the picture books could also be presented very didactic if one is not careful. And I believe in that way one could also alienate some of your readers. I think and I believe that a picture book is in the first instance literature and art, and if it's good literature and art, it will have a message and it will carry a strong message, but it can never be in the first instance an educational tool. It's a wonderful bonus if it could be used in all of the wonderful disciplines that I mentioned. And of course, it can never be moralistic and never be propagandistic. And the last instance, I'd quickly like to show you projects that my students, some of them chose to do, that dealt with, they were individual projects, independent projects, they could choose the subject matter, and I was pleasantly surprised to learn how many of them were interested to deal with contentious subject matter, with difficult issues, and with inclusivity. The first one is Bethany Wheeler. You can see the slide there. I do not understand. And she suffers from Erland syndrome, which is not an optic impairment, but it's got to do with a wrong message between the eye and the brain, and that leads to clumsiness, as we might phrase it, or an inability to read or read easily, a variety of things. And these are our concept illustrations, and I think it's a wonderful idea. You might not be able to read the text. I can't see there now. But it's the story about the little bear who says his mother always told him that he was special, but he never knew why. And you'll notice that the text is blurred, and Bethany told me that is exactly what it looks like to have Erland syndrome. Before she got the treatment, that's what the text would look. And it's the story of the other kids teasing her, which was also the case with Bethany. And there was a new teacher at some stage. Oh, the first teacher was even rather mean to her, did not understand. She thinks she was just being difficult. And you could see the other animals at the back throwing paper bullets at the little panda. And then one day there was a new teacher, and the new teacher was sympathetic and could immediately understand that there was something not, I wouldn't want to use the word normal, but not similar to the other children's abilities with this kid. So she got her to see a specialist, and she got the treatment. And Bethany, the student of mine, has green glasses. When I first met her, I thought, wow, this is really a fashion statement. They're really cool glasses. But then she told me, no, she's got this, and the treatment works with color. So from here on, the text is correct, and it could be read. And the little panda can now understand that she's special, as her mother always said. There she is. The next one I'll quickly... do I have time left? 2 minutes, great. Laura Cooper, who made a little story. There we go. A little hedgehog who hedgehogs have to eat a lot in summer. This one did not want to do it. She just wanted to play. This one really doesn't work now. She does not want to eat, and she just wants to play. And in the end, it really gets into a bad state. When she does become hungry, there's little left, and then she eats everything she can find. You can page one, please. Oh, you can just hold it there. It's okay. And then when it's time to hibernate, she cannot fall asleep because she ate too late. So, and she's awake, half awake all winter whilst the others are asleep. And in summer, it's really a bit of a problem for her. But she learned a lesson that way. But Laura chose to tell this story as a point of departure for bibliotherapy, if somebody wished to do that. On the surface, it's already a charming story. But this is a good way of addressing eating disorders, perhaps. I think we'll skip the last one. You can just show us 1, 2, 3 pictures or so. They all by Felicity. Yeah, another. A beautiful story, but I'll not go into that now because I want to touch upon one last thing about a little rabbit who did not realize that she was dead, but she could not make her coffee in the morning. She could not take a shower, which is the most severe form of being excluded from your own body, your own consciousness. Quite an opportunistic story, perhaps even a little esoteric, but I was quite surprised at how lovely she did it. The last thing that I want to tell you about, and I'll just take 1 minute to do that, is that we have a very new enterprise at the University of Worcester, which is called the International Center for the Picture Book in Society. The aim of this center is to provide an international focus in the UK for making and study of the picture book, defined in its broader sense. Children's books, comics, handmade books, zines, educational books, e-books, and graphic novels. We aim to take a multicultural approach to engaging society in its broadest terms with picture books, embracing minorities and socially disenfranchised people, and to promote UK awareness of picture book making beyond the Anglophone environment, establishing a platform for showcasing picture books published across the globe. Our facilities will be available for children who do not have facilities like that, bookmaking with especially schools that do not have the similar facilities available. We'll have the first project is an exhibition of an international competition, which is happening in the Hive the end of this month and will run for a month with Lemniscott publishers, and it will be Dutch, English, and Belgian illustrations. I have left some flyers in the corner of the platform there, if you like to get. We want friends for our center. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you very much. Sorry for the speaking through my nose because I've got a bad cold. But, okay. I want to share a few experiences on inclusion with you. In 2006, myself and a couple of colleagues were the guests of CEDA in Stockholm, and we were taken on a visit to a library in Uppsala. When we came out of the library, we stood outside waiting for our bus. Then we noticed a man in a wheelchair come out of the library, and a driver of a vehicle drove close to him and lowered the back of the vehicle, and the man wheeled himself into the vehicle and was driven off. I was most impressed. This is a society which cares about the disabled so much, so that a special vehicle has been designed and manufactured for them to make it easy for them to be as mobile as possible. I've been staying at the Tavistock Hotel in London every April since 1990. But this April, I noticed something different. There is now a recorded message in the elevator that indicates each floor and the closing and opening of the elevator doors. I was jolted the first time I entered the elevator, and it said, door closing, then 5th floor, door opening. And as I got out, I heard door closing. I was baffled, so I asked for explanation and was told that it is for the benefit of guests who are visually impaired. I was amazed. In fact, coming to Mexico City on Lufthansa 2 days ago, I noticed that the toilet, there's a special toilet for the disabled, for the physically challenged. This is something perhaps that people in this part of the world, take for granted. In my part of the world, it's a different ball game altogether. In Africa, things are somewhat different. Among many traditional Africans, the concept of the ideal person is that he or she should be born in circumstances that admit no cynicism. A person's body must be integral and whole. Therefore, somebody who is born with a defect is not considered a real human being. A child who fails to walk is considered to be some curse or punishment for the parents. Even in this day and age, when we know that if you give a child inoculation against polio, the child will not get the disease, people still do not pay attention, and they don't inoculate the children against such diseases. Therefore, children, by the time they should be walking, they can't walk and they are crippled. And instead of seeking proper medical attention, they blame it on gods and devils and witches and things like that. And because of this, people with disability are often sidelined, stigmatized, and they do suffer in the society a lot. The president of Ghana, John Mahama, in selecting his cabinet ministers in 2013, dared to appoint one Dr. Seydou Dana, a blind man, as a minister. While the appointment received wide commendation from many Ghanaians and seen as a breakthrough for people with disability who have been stigmatized, marginalized, and sometimes discarded as aberrations of nature, there were others who considered the appointment a mistake. Dr. Seydou Dana was appointed a Minister of Chieftaincy and Traditional Affairs, and ironically, it was a chief who stood up against his appointment on the grounds that it is taboo to appoint a blind man to such a position. I'm happy to say that the president stuck to his guns, and today Dr. Dana is a cabinet minister. It is 5 years since Ghana passed the Persons with Disability Act, but many disabled people still face exclusion and discrimination. It is more disturbing when in Sierra Leone, for example, people, especially children, were callously and brutally maimed in the gruesome civil war that ravaged that country in recent years. Those who are either disabled from birth or through accident cannot be catered for. Yet, more disabled people were deliberately and heartlessly created because of greed. Some African societies even object to multiple births. In fact, in southeastern Nigeria, it used to be a taboo to have twins or triplets, and they used to kill these children. It took Mary Slessor, a Scottish missionary and nurse, to stop this outrage. With the possible exception of South Africa, our planners and policy implementers often do not take into account the special needs and of the physically challenged. Therefore, school buildings, transport, public infrastructure do not make any allowance for the disabled, and similarly in education. Teachers are not trained in inclusive education, and there are few special schools for children with disabilities, such as School for the Blind, School for the Deaf, or schools for children with autism, Down syndrome, and those with other learning challenges. These are not even accessible by all children with disability because the parents cannot afford it. On 12 August 2014, there was a World International Property Organization conference in Accra, at which the World Society for the Blind asked the publishers and authors to make gratis the rights for the Braille versions of their books. It was said that most of the books, or millions of books published in the world each year, barely 5% get translated into Braille. I believe Ghanaian publishers took this request in good faith. Last month in Zimbabwe, there was a call for free education for children with disabilities. In Ghana, the Ghana Education Service, Teacher Education Division, and UNICEF have agreed on a draft inclusive education policy. This is because the existing policy is not comprehensive enough from primary to university, leaving many young people with physical and mental challenges, as well as those with learning difficulties, marginalized. Currently, about 500,000 children are out of school, and the majority are the disabled. In spite of all these issues, there are a few attempts by publishers and writers to celebrate the disabled and the marginalized. And I want to share a few examples with you. The first one is called Susu's Call by Mesha Kasari. It is the story of a crippled boy who, through sheer determination and his incredible spirit, is able to save his village from floods with the assistance of his dog. He is rewarded with a wheelchair and is able to go to school like the other children in the village. Now, this book became the favorite of a real crippled boy, Masawood, who frequents a children's library in one of the poor communities in Accra. This boy used to crawl on all fours or had to be carried on his mother's back. A visitor to the library noticed that the boy was always with the same book, so he decided to look at the book himself. He then realized that the bond between the crippled boy and the character in the book. He offered to pay for the surgeries to correct the boy's legs. Now, Masawood can walk with the aid of crutches, and he no longer crawls on all fours. Now, the joy of the owner of the library was so great that she did another book with Masawood's story entitled The Lucky One. Okay, yeah, that's it. It is common knowledge that a plague in Africa, which broke out much earlier than Ebola, is HIV/AIDS. Because of its infectious nature, affected people are stigmatized. In L'arbre pour Loli, A Tree for Loli, written in French by Fatou Keita of Ivory Coast, a child is ostracized by her classmates and friends in a school when they hear she has HIV/AIDS. It is only after her death that the friends realize that they should have been more sympathetic towards her. The story is to encourage children to embrace children with HIV/AIDS in their fold. It is not only the physically and mentally challenged who should be included in children's literature, but also those who are marginalized in society for one reason or the other. On a more positive note, a group of children now celebrated in children's literature are shepherd boys. Across the Sahel region of West Africa, a large number of the boys are in charge of the family herd of cattle, sheep, or goats, and they spend a great deal of their time herding these animals to graze. These boys often do not go to school. In Ghana, the situation was so great that the Ministry of Education, with the assistance of the World Bank, decided to take education to the children in the fields. So classes were held under trees where the shepherds could undertake literacy classes with the teachers while keeping an eye on the animals at the same time. How a boy spends his day in the Sahel region of West Africa is celebrated in Meliga's Day, written by Mesha Kasari. As mentioned earlier, such shepherd boys are found all over Africa, and like their West African counterparts, in South Africa, we also find them. Out in the fields one day, in the mountains of Transkei, two boys, Lungwiza and Malusi, discuss their ambitions. Lungwiza wants to be a footballer and join the national team Bafana Bafana. Malusi, on the other hand, wants to be the president of his country. Lungwiza can't help rolling with laughter at Malusi's ridiculous ambition to be president of his country. But is it all that ridiculous? Suddenly, the great Madiba appears on the scene and interjects, "I was once a head boy too. It is right to be a head boy and rise to be president of one's country." Not many African children, or even the head boys themselves, know that the great Madiba was once a head boy. And there are other stories, like Fly, Eagle, Fly, which encourages the child, to move away from his situation and aspire to greater things, or Mimi Mystery, in which the writer takes a girl from rural Ethiopia and gives her a career which is frowned upon by the society. But because of that career, she is able to bless her village with water in time of drought. There is also the story of the harrowing story of a girl pursued by an entire village, including her own mother, with a circumcision knife. And the author is able to present the story in such a way that even though it's a harrowing story, it is very thrilling and children love it. But no, we passed that one. No, you didn't show the. Yes, you have to. You have to go back. Meliga's Day is one. This one is the one in West Africa, and then this is the one from South Africa. The boys, who had the animals on the hills of the Transkei, and the Madiba meets them and encourages them, to. And he tells them that it's possible to become president of one's country even though one is a head boy. It is possible to do that. Now, The last story I'd like to mention is the Blue Marble, which is a heartwarming story from Uganda by Jackie Butesta Batanda. It is about the resolve of an orphan child determined to keep her alcoholic father for herself and her 2 younger sisters. It requires her to ensure that there is money for food and everything, including school fees. However, the youngest child, Ajambo, gets a lucky marble, and things began to change for the better, including the much dreaded stepmother. Now, finally, there is a celebration of the girl child in the Jamila series by Nikki Daly. Nikki Daly has a gift for respecting children and the child in each one of us. Spunky Jamila is the heroine of 5 hilarious stories: Jamila's Dress, Yebo Jamila, Where is Jamila, Happy Birthday Jamila, and a song for Jamila. In Yembo Jamila, the feisty little heroine is as resourceful and determined as ever. She is asked to take care of the chicken that is to be cooked for the Christmas dinner. The bird becomes her pet. As Xmas draws near, Jamila balks at the terrible destiny that awaits the chicken and decides to set the fowl free. The fowl runs riot in the local beauty salon. Jamila is able to convince her mother to allow the fowl to be a pet instead of Christmas dinner. Charming Jamila is a universal girl child. Each of these stories deals with some kind of challenge from the child's point of view and deserves to be included in children's literature. The writers of the continent are exploring all kinds of vexing issues. Some of them may raise eyebrows and even challenge decorum, but they are gradually gaining respect. This is especially evident in the literature for children and young adults, where juxtaposing learning, sensitivity, correctness, and pleasure is always the objective. And in doing this, parents and relatives are not excluded, thanks to World Reader, an organization that tries to ensure that children in Africa enjoy reading with the participation of their family members, mostly parents. In Africa, so far as inclusion in children's literature is concerned, I dare say that we, the publishers and the authors, have left Egypt, but we haven't reached the promised land yet. Thank you very much.
Gracias, Fanuel, y gracias a Ivy por la invitación, la oportunidad de estar aquí con todos ustedes. Tengo 3 aparatos aquí, seguramente alguno va a fallar, así es que por favor tengan paciencia. ¿Sí? ¿Ya está? Sí. Ajá. Bueno, para contestar a las preguntas de Fanuel, todas muy interesantes, quiero mencionar 4 aspectos dentro de un marco amplio de inclusión y exclusión. Primero quiero hablar de inclusión dentro del texto, después en cuanto a la inclusión del lector, luego en la investigación y finalmente en la mediación y la pedagogía. Desde hace aproximadamente 30 años, autores, ilustradores, editores están más conscientes del tema y actualmente existen un gran número de libros que incluyen una variedad de realidades, como estamos viendo aquí en este congreso. Como dice el autor inglés Patrick Ness, ¿cómo puedes escribir una historia sobre la vida real y que no sea diversa? Es lo que el mundo es, irrefrenablemente. No escribo libros con diversidad para instruir. Los escribo porque el no hacerlo sería una mentira. Patrick estaba justamente respondiendo al abuso racista que recibió la autora inglesa Malorie Blackman, ahora la Children's Laureate en Gran Bretaña, Mallory Blackman recibió este tipo de abusos y de amenazas cuando dijo que era necesario diversificar más los libros para niños. A su vez, ella hizo el comentario al llamar la atención sobre un proyecto en el cual el análisis de los libros producidos en Estados Unidos revelaba que todavía los libros que incluían minorías étnicas eran de un porcentaje muy bajo. En este proyecto, We Need Diverse Books, concluyó: en vez de volverse más inclusivos, los libros para niños, se están volviendo más exclusivos. En vez de contar historias que reflejan las vidas de todas las personas diversas que las leen, se están enfocando en las experiencias singulares que son ya insidiosas a través de los medios. Estas experiencias insidiosas justamente conducen a los estereotipos y prejuicios que a veces todavía pasan desapercibidos en medios comerciales. No voy a mencionar ningún ejemplo porque no se trata de mencionar ejemplos negativos, pero creo que escucharemos algunos de estos títulos en este congreso. Hay otra forma de inclusión dentro del texto, y ya se ha mencionado también aquí un poco. Tiene que ver con las estructuras que invitan al lector a responder a múltiples niveles en esos textos. Pensemos, por ejemplo, en el grado de complejidad del texto que respete la inteligencia de los lectores. Justamente David Almond mencionó esto hace unos minutos. Pensemos también en un lenguaje literario que reta al lector, pero que es accesible a la vez. En la presencia del juego, del sentido del humor y la subversión. Y sobre todo en apertura de significados que permita la inclusión de las múltiples respuestas de diversos lectores. Creo que me faltó pasarla. No. Esto estaba yo bien. Sí. Sin embargo, persisten los textos con fines didácticos basados en un modelo de déficit, de recepción pasiva de la infancia y la juventud, y estos excluyen las posibilidades de crear significados alternativos. Ahora sí, pasemos a la inclusión del lector. Es indudable que ha incrementado mucho la oferta de libros y la promoción de la lectura en muchos países, en las últimas 2 o 3 décadas quizá. Sin embargo, muchos lectores todavía son excluidos o se sienten excluidos de este club de lectores, del Literacy Club, que mencionó Frank Smith desde 1987. Normalmente se sienten excluidos por no tener ya sea poder adquisitivo, acceso a bibliotecas o librerías o acceso a mediación adecuada. En un proyecto que estoy comenzando aquí en México apenas, junto con la Universidad Iberoamericana, tenemos como objetivo comparar las lecturas que están haciendo los lectores jóvenes hoy con las lecturas que hacían y sus prácticas lectoras hace 25 años. Vamos a ver qué es lo que ha cambiado, si es que realmente ha cambiado algo. Y les pedimos a los chicos con los que estamos trabajando en secundarias que completen este enunciado. ¿Leería más? Sí. Estas fueron algunas de sus respuestas. ¿Leería más si tuviera dinero para comprar libros? Si hubiera libros interesantes en la escuela, si tuviera libros en casa o una biblioteca cerca, si tuviera lentes. En otras palabras, son excluidos o se sienten excluidos todavía de ese club lector. Ahora voy a mencionar la investigación, la mediación y la pedagogía inclusivas. Acabamos de publicar un libro sobre un proyecto en el que estuvimos trabajando muchos años, usando el libro de Shontan, Emigrantes, que seguramente todos ustedes ya conocen. Lo que hicimos fue trabajar con niños inmigrantes de diversos países para ver cuáles eran las formas de incluir a estos chicos dentro de los contextos educativos de su nuevo país. Y además, cómo a través de libros como el de Shontan podían ellos contar sus propias historias y incluirse a sí mismos, digamos, en sus nuevos mundos. Tengo aquí un ejemplar del libro, si lo quieren ver después, y me da mucho gusto que estén aquí algunas de mis coautoras. No tengo tiempo de contarles más sobre estos proyectos. Este es el que continuamos haciendo en la Universidad de Glasgow y en este caso quisimos incluir no solo a los niños inmigrantes, sino a niños de segundas y terceras generaciones de familias migrantes, además de chicos en la ciudad de Glasgow de zonas socioeconómicamente bajas. Lo que quisimos hacer aquí, el objetivo era que fuera realmente una investigación que no nada más se dedicara a sacar datos, a excavarlos y a llevárnoslos, sino que fuera una investigación inclusiva. Perdón, este es el sitio red del proyecto de Journeys, From Images to Words and Back Again. Este lo pueden buscar en el internet. Entonces, la idea fue que los maestros fueron invitados a colaborar en la investigación a través de su diseño, pero también en la evaluación de las estrategias como herramientas pedagógicas. A los alumnos los invitamos a responder a los textos y también a evaluar el proceso. A los padres de familia también se les invitó a que conocieran el trabajo que estábamos haciendo y a responder al trabajo de sus hijos. Los métodos y las herramientas que usamos fueron tanto para la investigación como para la enseñanza. Entonces, todos nos beneficiamos. Una imagen rápido de los padres de familia en la escuela, en este evento que tuvimos al final del proyecto. Finalmente, quiero hablar de la inclusión en la mediación y la pedagogía. Y quizás sean algunos puntos que nos puedan ayudar a avanzar en este diálogo, como decía Fanuel al principio. Son puntos que han surgido como resultado de estas investigaciones. En primer lugar, nos dimos cuenta que es tan importante aprovechar el acervo que tenemos, es tan rico y podemos promover no solo una experiencia lectora placentera, sino también crítica. Y eso es muy importante para que justamente no se nos vayan estos libros, estos prejuicios, estereotipos que a veces no nos damos cuenta que están ahí. También podemos utilizar herramientas para una aproximación más abierta, flexible y otra vez crítica, lo que llamamos critical literacy. Sí, está ahí, ¿verdad? Crear también estrategias orales y visuales que ofrezcan un campo más nivelado. Es decir, que en este campo de respuestas a la literatura visual no hay expectativas a priori de quién es bueno para leer o quién es bueno para escribir, sino que es un campo en el que todos pueden participar. Y hay que ir un poco más de la inclusión nada más del chico, nada más del lector. Hay que incluir también su contexto social, su contexto político, cultural, lingüístico. Entonces, invitar y valorar las prácticas letradas del hogar, de culturas populares y las prácticas multimodales que realizan estos chicos, tanto para el esparcimiento como para propósitos funcionales. Y este tipo de exploración de la narrativa personal, familiar y colectiva se puede hacer en espacios comunes, culturalmente sensibles, para el intercambio de experiencias, la interpretación colectiva y la expresión creativa, para que todo esto nos enriquezca más. Esta es una imagen también, una de las muchas imágenes de los chicos trabajando justamente con The Rabbits de Shontan, de conejos. Fueron uno de los libros que utilizamos. Y tengo también, como Piet, tengo alguna información sobre este proyecto que voy a poner ahí. Entonces, los mejores libros nos ofrecen avenidas para acercarnos a maneras alternativas de comprender el mundo, para respetar e incluir a los otros en nuestras vidas y así transformarnos y enriquecernos nosotros como seres humanos. Gracias.
Buenos días. Intentaré hablar portuñol. Sí, bien. Agradezco muchísimo a mi amigo Fanuel, a la organización de este congreso, a Piet, a Cos y Evelyn. Intentaré hablar un ratito sobre... Me interrumpas cuando quieras, ¿sí? Somos muy amigos. Entonces, el tema de la inclusión es el tema del arte para mí. Todo el arte es una posibilidad en sí de inclusión. El artista es un expatriado, es un desincluido. ¿Puedo decir eso? Excluido. Es un excluido. Desincluido puede ser poético. Porque le interesa la frontera, le interesa todo que tiene que ver con el raro, con el extrañarse, con pensar que aquel que parece lo más correcto es lo más raro. En muchos países como Brasil, como China, como México, como Sudáfrica, como los países de BRIC, Rusia, se habla mucho de desarrollo, macroeconomía. Todos oyen ahora macroeconomía. Me interesa que el macro, pero la macroeconomía es una subjetividad que no la comprendo para nada. Porque las especificidades de los ciudadanos, su casa, su familia, quién es. En Brasil, probablemente la idea de la propaganda de una familia, padre, hijo, madre, no existe la mayoría de las veces. Una vez estuve yo en Rondônia, en la casa de una amiga, eso ya es familia en Brasil, ¿verdad? Incluyendo yo. Ahí estaba un sitio en el bosque muy cerca de un río increíble con unas hormigas que las hormigas le llamarían de hormigas, ¿sabes? Pero eran muy grandes. Ahí estaba una familia donde eso es el hijo de mi hijo que está en Brasilia ahora. Esto es el hijo de una persona, esto es mi sobrino, y todos se ayudaban como una familia, un poco como en muchas sociedades indígenas de Brasil, un poco también como me gusta siempre de hablar de animales. Entonces voy a hablar de cómo se llama la capibara en México. Chihuil, capibara. Hay un nombre distinto para diferentes. El mayor roedor del mundo, ¿sabes? ¿Cómo es? Chiguin. Chiguire. Capivara. Ok. Hidroqueres es su nombre científico. Busquen en Google. Es un animal genial. Es como el hipopótamo de América, ¿verdad? Pero es un roedor. Yo tengo un personaje que es una capibara. Este animal viven en bandos. Cuando les gusta mucho el agua, en cuanto van todos al agua, una madre toma cuenta, o un padre, de todos los niños. Entonces, es un animal que entiende la idea de familia como la idea de que todos son hijos de todos. Entonces, es un animal padrísimo. Me gusta. En Brasil, muchas veces los niños no ven sus casas en los libros para niños. Muchas veces, entonces el ciudadano piensa que no es siquiera un ciudadano, porque su casa no tiene una chimenea. Y por ahí va. La idea de casa, la idea primaria de casa, es una idea que no se afirma muchas veces por eso. ¿Qué decir de muchos libros que no hablan de dos papás, que no hablan de dos mamás? Yo tengo una historia que habla de un chico que tiene 2 hamsters y ahí está, todo bien. Pero un día la madre, la hembra muere y le piden, no, el niño es ya un poco inteligente de más, ¿sabes? Entonces no saben qué hacer con ese menino tan inteligente. Le piden, por favor, uno solito no, va a comprar un otro, pero compra un otro macho, y no sabe. Y a principio los 2 hamsters se quedan ahí, pero empiezan a dormir juntos. Y ya los padres que solo se comunican con él por mensajes en la refrigerador, le dicen, precisamos hablar. Y por ahí va. Porque esta idea de que lo que está puesto ahí, la cadena productiva, lo que hace parte del universo pragmático es el normal, eso es completamente absurdo para el artista. En Brasil hay una experiencia maravillosa, quiero hablar de una cosa muy buena que hay ahí, que es Sara Kubitschek, que es un hospital que trabaja con todos los niños, adultos también, pero mucho con niños con habilidades específicas, víctimas de quemaduras, hay de todo ahí, en un sitio que es diseñado por un gran arquitecto. Se habla mucho de Niemeyer, ¿verdad? Pero LIJ es un gran arquitecto que hizo un hospital donde las ventanas son como puertas y hay plantas y hay libros por todos los sitios. Entonces voy ahí muy a menudo porque mi tía trabaja ahí como voluntaria hace casi 30 años. Y los niños ahí están conectados con la idea. Hay muchos murales, muchas obras de Atos Bulcão, un importantísimo artista narrativo visual de Brasilia, y todo está mezclado. Entonces, la idea de que el niño también es un escritor, también es un diseñador, un artista, está también presente en ese espacio que está en el corazón de la ciudad. Y desde ahí se puede ver la ciudad. Entonces, quería dedicar esa charla a Sara Kubitschek.
Hello. Well, this is the final conclusion of the roundtable. Books are important, necessary, and powerful. Well, goodbye and see you later.
Gracias, Manuel. Gracias a nuestros invitados. Si gustan pasar por aquí para entregarles un pequeño obsequio de parte de Ivy. Ya sé que hay hambre, hay que irnos a comer. Anuncios rapidísimo. La comida empieza a la 1 en el 3er piso, Salón Nuevo León. Regresamos a las mesas paralelas, 14:30. Ya les habíamos comentado, busquen la sesión en el salón que les corresponde a los ponentes y en los demás podemos elegir a cuál nos interesa meternos. A las 16 horas estará la sesión de carteles en el Salón Nuevo León, parte 3. Los invitamos a todos, por favor, a las 17:30 a la obra ¿Quién te entiende?, de un extraordinario grupo de actores sordos mexicanos, Seña y Verbo. Otras consideraciones. Al final del día encontrarán en la mesa de hospitalidad la lista de todos los participantes con sus contactos para que podamos comunicarnos siempre entre nosotros. Mesa de hospitalidad. Y finalmente nos vemos al ratito por aquí. Busquen sus mesas paralelas y nos vemos en la tarde para disfrutar de teatro. Alicia Molina y David Almond van a estar firmando libros ahora en el foyer, en el área de librería. Gracias.